Hello and welcome to Streams brought to you by Good News Broadcasting. This is the podcast where we review and critique popular TV shows and movies on our streaming platforms and explore their themes to see how they may align or conflict with Scripture so you can watch with wisdom. My name is Eamon and today I am joined by Tom. Thanks for coming again, Tom. How's life?
Hello, and it's me, Hugh Grant. I'm a baddie.
That was really bad.
Was it?
Just before we came into the recording, you did a good Hugh Grant impression.
I choked in the moment.
Where that one just kind of felt like it was a bit of David Attenborough, a bit of posh Englishman, all blended together.
I'm sorry, I've let you down.
Well, there you go. It's a bit of a spoiler, other than the title, which they've obviously seen already if they've clicked on this. But we're going to be looking at the movie Heretic with Hugh Grant. And he's probably the only person in this movie that I actually recognise.
I did recognise one of them.
Oh, did you?
One of the girls, who is Sister Paxton, was played by Chloe East. And she was actually in a programme called Liv and Maddie, which I don't imagine would be something you would watch. It's
Liv
one of the
and Maddie?
programmes that my youngest daughter, Phoebe, watches. So it was really weird because this is very different.
Is that like a Disney kids film?
Disney twins idea and very goofy, very light-hearted. So, yeah, I was like, wow. But apparently, I didn't know that she and the other female actress, both of them grew up in the Mormon church. So, kind of quite close to the bone for them, interestingly. So
There you go. The more you know. Done some research. Well, this movie came out in November 2024, and it's now on Amazon Prime, I believe, here in the UK. So that's where you can watch it. It's officially classed as a horror/thriller, and it feels more like a soft, very soft horror. You know, I've watched a bit of horror in the past, not really that my thing, but this wasn't really scary in terms of a horror thing or super gory. There's kind of slight elements of it. So
okay, interesting. Do you think Christians can watch horror?
I don't know.
I was talking to someone about it recently because they were like, oh, I've watched some horror, but I don't really like it. And I was thinking, I don't know if I know any Christian that is just like, man, my genre is horror. But then I don't know if, I haven't really hugely thought about it. I don't like it. But I think most Christians I speak to don't like it. I think, well, that probably makes sense because it's probably not super helpful. Pretty grim and looking at things that, you know, I think we're just often obsessed as Christians with sex. It's like, as long as it's not graphic sexually, it's fair game. But actually seeing somebody ripped apart and bleeding and guts and heads chopped off probably isn't that great for you either. So, I mean, I know, try not to get into spoilers here, but I do think that it was horror, and I think I was lied to in the trailer because I watched the advert for it and thought it was really well done, and I thought very much intense, suspenseful drama, thriller. And actually, I think it fell into just being horror, is what I think.
No, that's fair, because I think it portrays itself as like a psychological thriller. It's going to get you thinking, you're going to be thinking what's going to happen next, but then it does kind of like derail, really, the second half. And we'll get into the spoilers of why that is. I'm not sure about the horror stuff. I'm 50-50 with it. I understand why people wouldn't watch it. At the same time, I understand why people maybe would dip into it.
But shall I tell you what happens?
Yeah.
And now I feel like we have kind of no, we haven't, but it's obviously not what you think on the surface. And so it is quite hard to kind of sum up the film without a spoiler. But the basic idea, you've got two young Mormon missionaries, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, who I've already mentioned. They visit the home of a polite Englishman, Mr. Reed, who is played by Hugh Grant, who wants to know more about the Mormon faith, but it turns out that he knows much more than he's letting on. It's a kind of dark thriller and a cat and mouse battle of wills. And yeah, I would say it is a horror.
Soft horror.
I'm not having that soft. And
I've watched some horrors before, which are so much worse than what this offers.
No, I'm not here to argue with you.
But so we've already done a bit of kind of the what did you think of it? So we'll get on straight to the rating of this. So then we can get into the spoilers because that's where we can really expand on things and talk about it because you really have to work hard not to give any spoilers when we're just talking about it. And so essentially, if you don't know what the rating is on this podcast, basically we rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is do not watch this as a Christian. It's not good for you. Whereas 5 is this is super safe. This is great. Any Christian of any age can watch this. Happy days. What would you give it and why?
If I'm being polite, like Mr. Reed, I would give it 1.5. It's dark, it's grim, but I have to admit, there is no bad language, and I guess that fits because it's about Mormons, and so he is very polite and respectful in a weird way that obviously kind of turns out to not be genuine. And in terms of violence, there are only a few moments when you think about it. It's very dark, particularly the second half, obviously. But in terms of violence, there are a few moments that are very gory. And there is just an undercurrent of sexuality that's never really fully explored. But you talked about that when you first saw it, when you came in the office, and just said it starts talking about sex and then there's sex in the middle. It's never shown in any way. But again, that's probably a kind of an ode to the Mormons, isn't it? That they wouldn't, would they actually do stuff? But felt like there was an undercurrent of sex that was never pursued. Film made me feel icky. That's my official word. So I felt like I was misled with the trailer. I wish I hadn't watched it.
Wow. Interesting. Well, when we get to the spoilers, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say and reasons why.
So your number is?
2. It's officially rated by the BBFC 15 for strong violence, bloody images, threat, and sexual references.
Interesting.
And so I think that I would give it a 2 because some of those things will automatically, you'll hear strong violence, bloody images, threat, sex, and be like, I'm out. I'm not going to watch that, which is fair enough. That's a fair enough reason to do that. But I think that it's an interesting watch, especially the first half, that might kind of get people hooked a little bit. But then, as I said earlier, it derails in the second half where I kind of just thought, oh, it's just got silly now. And there's just kind of pointless violence and there's pointless kind of references and different things like that I just thought maybe not for everybody. And I realised that even just the fact that it's a semi-horror, even though soft horror in my opinion, that would be enough for some people. And so it's one of those where I think I would only recommend it to a select few people who I know may be interested in certain elements that this film has to offer. Well, we'll move on to the spoiler section now. And so if you haven't watched this film and you want to go away and watch it, this is your opportunity to turn off and to come back later on. And so we dive into some of the nitty-gritty of this film. But I've given you ample amounts of time, so if you listen and hear any spoilers now, it's your fault entirely. But this kind of film, there is so much that we could say. As we've already established so far, it's a film of two halves, and there is so much detail that we could nitpick and unpack. It's one of those films that leaves you with a lot of questions and a lot of theories. It's not a simple plot line. There is a lot of kind of different points going on. But there are kind of 3 different themes that I think we've established from this film, and we're going to break them down one by one and talk about some of the spoilers. And so the first one is iterations, the second one is control, and the third one is evil. And so we'll break these down piece by piece and unpack them and talk about some of the spoilers within this film. And so the first one is around iterations. And so what Mr. Reed does is he sits Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes down and talks about Mormonism. And he starts to ask them questions and critique Mormon theology a little bit. And he uses this to kind of start off this idea that each religion is just an iteration of an earlier idea. And so basically someone would come along, they would take an earlier idea, they would repackage it slightly, and then they would add to it, basically. And so Mr. Reed uses 3 examples to illustrate this idea that all religion is just an iteration of another.
Do you think it was purposeful that he had 3 points? Do you think he was like a 3-point sermon?
Maybe, I don't know.
Because it everything seems to be for a reason in this film. So there you go.
It's entirely possible.
There you go.
Well, so he uses these 3 different examples to illustrate. So he talks about music, he talks about Monopoly, and he talks about ancient faiths. And so you're obviously the music guy out of us two. I don't really listen to music, everyone. I'm more of a podcast guy. And so I'm going to leave the music side to you since you're our expert.
I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, so I'll take that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to sound like I'm a terrible person when we're not recording.
No, to say the music expert, I love a bit of music. So, yes, he starts very light. He starts by playing them a song by a band called the Hollies, and then he says, do you recognise it? And they say no. And then he basically starts to quote Creep from the band Radiohead. And so that is a surreal moment when you've got Hugh Grant singing Creep to these 2 Mormon missionaries. But anyway, what he points out is that the Hollies actually sued Radiohead for stealing some of the melodies of their song. Radiohead sued Lana Del Rey because she used a similar melody from that song as well. So it's all about basically stealing, copying versions of other things. And so that just leads into this example with Monopoly as well, which that just blew my mind. I don't know about you. Did you look into the Monopoly one?
Yes, I did look into the Monopoly one. And so essentially what he does is he talks about three different faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And he uses monopoly to illustrate this idea of iterations again. And so says that Judaism is this original recipe monopoly, if you like. It's called the landlord's game. And then you've got Christianity, which is the standard monopoly, which is the most famous games in the world, most popular. And then you've got Islam, which is I think it was a crazier version of Monopoly. Or it was a more modern version of Monopoly.
More modern version. And then he said Mormonism is like the zany spin-off.
Yeah,
which was
it was
quite
Bob
funny.
Ross Monopoly. And so he kind of talks about this idea that, again, of iterations, that Islam stole from Christianity, Christianity stole from Judaism. And so I looked into the kind of Monopoly thing, because I thought it was quite interesting. And essentially, he was actually quite right with it, to be honest. And so you have this landlord's game, which was invented by a woman called Elizabeth Maggie in 1903. So a long time ago. And she designed this game to show the negative effects of land monopolies and unchecked capitalism. It's a critique, really, of what Monopoly is about, which is making loads of money. And then in the 1930s, a man called Charles Darrow played this game, liked the idea, took the basic premise, repackaged it slightly, obviously made it about accumulating wealth and
Exact
power
opposite,
and
yeah.
everything like that. And then he sold the game to whoever makes Monopoly, and he made absolute millions upon millions of quid. But it's interesting because obviously he's trying to make this point again of iterations, and they're just borrowing these ideas, repackaging it, and then using it to sell something for their own benefit. But then he goes on to talk about the faiths. And this one was the most interesting to me, I think, because I think this is often something you hear quite a lot from atheists, from people of different faiths, that Christianity especially has borrowed a lot from other ancient myths, other ancient religions and festivals and different things like this. And so he talks about a number of different ancient figures, such as Mithras. Mithras performed miracles and was marked by the sign of the cross. He talks about Horus, who walked on water, was crucified, had 12 disciples. He talks about Krishna, who was a carpenter, born to a virgin, baptized, rose from the dead, ascended into heaven. And he said there are at least 12 gods who were born on the 25th of December who predate Jesus. And so I did some digging again. And to be honest with you, I found that all these claims were pretty much false. And so the only one I could find some correlation to was the 12 gods who were born on the 25th of December who predate Jesus. And it wasn't exactly 12 gods, but there are other figures who predate Jesus in ancient cultures who are born on the 25th of December or who have significant things take place to them on the 25th of December. But obviously many people just kind of look at that and say, well, that's just because the winter solstice is around that time and stuff like that. And no Christian, I think, pretends that Jesus was actually born on the 25th of December. But it's interesting because with the music, obviously, there's some truth to what he's trying to say there. With the Monopoly, there is truth to what he's saying there. But then with the religious stuff, he just completely and utterly got it wrong. And I couldn't figure out whether that was just lazy writing on the kind of this kind of faith side, or whether that was intentional to kind of like speak from authority to try and get them on side a little bit or something. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, because you have the fact that just to say that various faiths today are a copy of a copy doesn't actually go against the fact that there is an original. And so what is actually true, you can always have copies of. And obviously we would believe that Christianity is true, and we shouldn't be surprised that there are copies of it. And we can see how the faith has developed through from Judaism. And so his arguments weren't really against theism. They weren't really against belief in God. They were more the way religion has changed so much over the years. Maybe his argument would be it's hard to trace where it originally came from. But it's interesting, as you look into it, I mentioned earlier in the podcast that both the female actors came from a Mormon background, but actually the directors did as well. One of the directors has married a Mormon, but he's not a Mormon himself. And the other person has been very interested in it and studied it a lot. And they said they didn't think it was an anti-Mormon film in any way. Whereas for me, I felt like the first bit, when they were in the first room, and he kind of ripped into Mormonism in terms of how its views have changed, particularly on polygamy, that suddenly it just so happens that in recent years, or more recent history, they've gone against what Joseph Smith said was a direct revelation of God. I thought that was pretty damning, and I'm not sure you can come back from that. As a Mormon, I wouldn't really know what I could say to that. It seems like the further he goes into religion, the more it just becomes really basic and fairly easily refutable claims. It would surprise me if the directors who had really looked into that as much as they did would be so lax on those areas. So maybe it was purposeful that Mr. Reed, actually when it came to that, was basically lying and seeing if he could kind of trick these girls who seemed so well-intentioned and so passionate about their faith. What if he told them stuff that isn't true, but could he still convince them with lies, basically?
Yeah, because I think the whole point of the film and the kind of the climax at the end is the idea of control. And it's very kind of Marxist in terms of, kind of it's the opium of the masses or whatever kind of Marx says, and that it's all religion is just designed to control working class people and keep them in their place and everything like that. And it just kind of felt, I think, pretty dumb. Because he kind of sets it up as like, you kind of think maybe he does believe in some kind of faith or maybe he doesn't. And you kind of go back and forth a little bit at different points in the film. And then he just goes, yeah, it's just all about control. And the reason you're here is because I designed it in such a way that you ended up here. It just felt a bit silly.
Yeah, I think when you get to the end, it seems to have descended into just complete farce. And to think that this guy, Mr. Reed, is so intent on religion being about control, and he doesn't seem to recognise that controlling women by kidnapping them and keeping them locked up in his basement and freezing them so that he can chop off various fingers. It's so dumb. But again, I think it's this presumption that a lot of people probably hold today that religion is about control. But I think we know as Christians that everybody is a slave to something. We live in a society where you are either a slave to sin or you're a slave to righteousness. And obviously we believe Galatians 5 verse 1 that for freedom Christ has set us free. And so actually if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, if you're filled with the Spirit, there is actually a great freedom in your life. And so yeah, I think his final point of control was completely false.
When I heard it, I looked back and went, okay, it makes certain elements of the film make sense, but then it's still pretty dumb. The fact that we've kind of spent this whole time sat here thinking that isn't it about certain religions or some kind of ancient thing, but no, it's just about a creepy man who wants to lock women up in cages and prove a point. It just kind of felt a bit silly.
Yeah, there was that moment, wasn't there, with the contraceptive implant, which I had no idea it looked like that. It was like it did look like a little metal probe or something. That's at the moment you're wondering, is this going to be a supernatural thing? Are they going to try and bring those elements in? But obviously not. It's very dark and very natural, if you get me.
Because when he took the implant out and he started to talk to Sister Paxton about the simulation, he was kind of saying, we're all in this simulation and she's not real and stuff like this, and the implant proves it. Because simulation theory is quite a popular thing these days. A lot of people believe that we're living in the matrix of sorts as this simulation and whatever, and you see a lot of stuff on social media about it. And so I thought maybe they're trying to push this idea because it's relatively new, it's kind of hitting a bit of a wave at the moment. But no, again, it was all just part of his silly lies to get her to go down into some lower basement, which was some lower basement, into some lower basement. Just a lot of basements.
Yeah, well, it was interesting that one of the scenes near the end, you see on the wall of one of the rooms a picture of Dante's Inferno, which is obviously a very famous book. And I think in some ways a lot of Christian views of hell over the years have been very influenced by that book. That was an interesting moment. You think you could describe the film as kind of just going to lower and lower levels of hell. I thought that was quite deep, really.
On that, this film, one of the overarching things is around evil and good versus evil, light versus dark, and faith versus no faith and whatever else. And you kind of see this really within the visuals itself. Like outside it's snowing and it's kind of white and it's bright and it's nice. And then inside, the dungeon or the basements, I should say, they're all cold, they're all really dark, and they're all really wet. It's always, there's a leak everywhere. And so how it doesn't get flooded is beyond me. You must have a really good drainage system, but you got to think of everything. If you're building basements upon basements, you got to think about your drainage. But
the house is dumb as well.
Yeah, the house is pretty dumb. But it's kind of these levels of these basements that kind of illustrate the light versus dark element. But you had some interesting thoughts on the evil aspect.
Well, we've had a big debate around whether it's horror, soft horror, all that kind of thing. And I've never watched really any horror that I can think of. But I know through culture that they normally rely on the kind of jump scares and they rely on the visuals being kind of stereotypically evil. It's, the person who's doing it looks evil or their face is disguised or disfigured or whatever. But you get a very different depiction of evil in this film because Mr. Reed is polite, he's well-spoken, he's a middle-aged, white Englishman, and he's got his glasses on. The glasses was like the best bit of the film for me. I love the glasses. If I actually searched for them afterwards, went on Google, searched for the glasses, but they were like £250, so I didn't buy them. But it made me think of 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13 to 15. It says, "For Satan himself masquerading as an angel of light, is it not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness? Their end will be what their actions deserve." And so he doesn't come across as your stereotypical kind of depiction of evil. But actually we know that from that verse that the devil, he's not going to wander around, he's not going to jump around as this red figure with horns and the kind of stereotype. Actually, things can be evil that might on the surface of it look really nice, really engaging, really pretty, whatever it is. I think sometimes Christians are a bit obsessed with what things look like in terms of that looks dark or that looks evil or that sounds evil, like music. But actually, you could have a pop song that sounds lovely and you've got a very pretty face singing it. But what if the actual words are as evil as any other metal song or whatever? So, yeah, I think the film very cleverly depicts evil in a very smiley and not what you would expect. And so I thought that was really interesting. Well, one of the reviews I read said this: Heretic is gruesome and bizarre and preposterous, only made palatable by Hugh Grant's dapper performance of evil. I think it's quite easy to play a bad guy, but he did do it fairly well.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think as well, when you kind of watch a lot of films and TV shows, as you said before, especially when it comes to the horror genre, it is just kind of grotesque, scary-looking people. But even in other genres of film, when it comes to a bad dude, they're often unhinged, they're a bit crazy, like all over the place, and like the Joker, he's unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do, and he's going to do something outrageous. He's going to blow up this building or whatever else. Whereas throughout the majority of the film anyway, Mr. Reed is really calm. Mr. Reed is really relaxed, and on the most part, he kind of uses his intelligence to break them down and to bring them to this place where they're descending to these basements upon basements upon basements and whatever. You kind of get to the end of the film, she ends up escaping, and the implication is that she survives at the end, and the butterfly comes and lands on her, and it's a callback to what she said earlier, because she said, if I died, I would want to come back as a butterfly so that I could fly around my loved ones. And so the implication is Sister Barnes, who dies, that's her coming back. But then we found out, literally just before recording this, that the butterfly at the end just disappears.
It does.
And it actually annoys me.
Because what do you think it means?
I think she's dead.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I think she died in the basement. She died from the stab wounds because Mr. Reed stabs her in the stomach. And I think this is her almost going into heaven. And then the butterfly being there is like Sister Barnes kind of saying, I'm already here, love. It's all right. It's decent up here.
I did look at an interview with the directors, and they said they left the end purposely ambiguous. And it used to be, when I was really in my film stage, I used to love that films ended where it would leave you to make a decision. I think as I get older, I just get a bit annoyed at that and say, tell me what happened. I can't be bothered trying to work it out. But there is a whole thing, isn't there? When we searched online, there is, I guess this is the way it goes nowadays with films. There's huge kind of online forums around whether they even genuinely believed. You've got moments where, Sister Paxton says that she knows that prayer doesn't work, but she still prays. You've got moments where she chooses the disbelief door because she thinks she'll be able to get out. Does she deny her faith at that point? Whereas Sister Barnes is the one who's on contraception, but does seem to believe more. I think you are just left to kind of decide for yourself. Obviously, the directors didn't feel like it was anti-Mormon or anti-religion at all. I think at the end, it was just a bit of a mishmash. I was left just thinking, I don't really know what to do with that. Yeah. But what annoys me about the film is the fact that it's got a number of talking points. I think we debated whether to do this film because if it's part of the horror genre, it's not something that many Christians watch, as we said at the beginning. But because of its faith aspect, there was so much to talk about. And it just annoys me because we didn't have as much to say on Car Masters or on, Inside Out. Yeah, one of those frustrations that it's a film I wouldn't recommend, but actually we've talked about quite a lot. And actually there's a lot of things going on. And so that leaves me in a bit of a quandary.
No, definitely. I think the reason why this film was worth reviewing is because of the faith aspect. But if it was just the second half of the film, I wouldn't watch it, I wouldn't review it, I wouldn't care about it. I wouldn't recommend it. But for the first half, because of that interesting element, it kind of throws that spanner in the works where you're like, I don't think this is for many people, many Christians that is, but it's an interesting watch, that first half. It is a strange one. And it does annoy me that this is a film where there are so many questions that are unanswered. And so there is a lot of debate, but I hate the fact there is a debate. As a superhero movie guy, as a Star Wars guy, whatever you want to say, I'm happy with the hero arc where you've got this guy, he's unknown, he just has all this mad power, he ends up starting to do well, has a bit of a struggle, kills the big bad, we all go home. I'm happy with that. I don't need like all these super crazy plot lines and kind of circles I have to go through, hoops I have to jump through in order to understand what's taking place, and at the end I still don't fully understand it. It annoys me.
Yeah, this wasn't a rom-com, and it certainly wasn't a Marvel film.
No, and I'm never doing a rom-com on this podcast.
That's a bold statement.
I hate rom-coms.
Soft rom-com?
That's unbelievable. That is unbelievable. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
We've given so much of the plot away that you don't need to watch it. Just listen to this, and then you can wonder, oh yeah, so Mormonism's not true. It doesn't debunk Christianity. Evil is really evil, and judgment is coming for people like Mr. Reed, who actually might look all nice and clean and tidy and put together on the surface, but actually, without Christ, you are lost, and judgment is coming. So,
I like that. That's a good summary of everything we've just said and the whole film itself. Well, thanks so much for joining us on streams. And if you do end up watching Heretic, please let us know what you think. I would be interested to know what your thoughts were on various different plot points and things that we've pointed out. And as well as that, if there is a show or a movie that you think we should check out in future episodes, we're all ears. So you can get in touch by emailing us at info@gnba.net. That's info@gnba.net. Also, if you're listening to this on your favourite podcast platform, please give us a like, a comment, a review, whatever it may be. It does help get it out there further. But that's all the time we have for now. We'll be back next time. See ya.